Welcome to our Flexbox crash course. In this crash course, we'll be learning about layouts because that's what Flexbox is for, and in quite a different way than before. Today we'll be going over some tasks, some mini tasks that will let me show you all the properties of Flexbox, and then after we finished with the 12 tasks that are here, you will have access to the files, and then you can start practicing it on your own, maybe start over, and it will be a way for you to master Flexbox because it makes web development and layouts really easy. So with that, let's get started. So before we begin, let's go over some slides. It will be just a minute. What is Flexbox? Flexbox stands for Flexible Box Layout Module. It's in its name. It helps you lay out things in your web page, because before this it was really a mess to lay out anything. What you have to know about Flexbox is it's two-dimensional and it's really easy to create layouts with it, and we'll go into the 2 dimensions right now. So what you see here is that whenever you're working with Flexbox, you have an x-axis and a y-axis, except here it's called main axis and cross-axis. And the thing that's important here is by default the main axis is a row and the cross-axis is vertical, it's a line. But if you switch to columns, and this will be explained and better understood when we actually have a look at the CSS, then the main axis switches and it now acts in a column way, so a line, a vertical line, and then the cross-axis switches to be a horizontal line. So I wanted to show you this to start off, and now we're going to start with our CSS. So to get started, first I've created an index.html. This will be a template which we'll be working in. You can get this file from our website, link in the description. And you don't really have to touch this HTML file. This is just the basic layout that's needed for these boxes to be shown. And then in our style.css, this is where we'll be actually working. I've imported a font, there is the body settings, some h2 settings. These are all really basic. Here is the box styling if you're interested, and there are some classes for the colors. And wherever we need to do some work, there will be a comment saying work here. So to get this started, the first task, it's saying make the items align in a row. All right, quite simple. The way you are going to use Flexbox anytime is saying display flex, because this is what will enable the flex properties to work, and this will set the default settings of Flexbox, which, as you can see, the first task is completed. We've aligned the items in a row. That's great, because as I said, the main axis of Flexbox is a horizontal row by default. Coming to the second one, make the items align in a column using flex properties. Now I could simply say remove the flex from here and it's already a column, but it's in the task that it needs to be done with flex properties. So work here. All right. Then we'll be saying flex direction. There's a property in Flexbox, and what we usually use here is either a column or a row, but you could reverse them if you prefer. So if I say column, it will act as if Flexbox wasn't applied by default. It will lay it out in a row. And now we'll have a look at the third task in the real difference between the main axis and the cross axis, because it's very important to understand these concepts. Otherwise, you won't be able to use Flexbox properly and you would get confused while using it. So there is something called justify content and align items. The justify content is used to position on the main axis. Right now, since we are applying display flex and we haven't set a flex direction, the main axis is in a horizontal manner. So if I say end as the justify content, it will align it horizontally to the end of the page. And there is something called align items, which is basically the cross axis, which, because the main axis is horizontal, the align items, the cross axis, is gotta be vertical. So here I actually need to make this a little bit bigger and give it a bigger height of 500 pixels. And now if I say align items center, you can see that they get aligned on the cross axis to the vertical axis on the center. I could also say end, and they could on the vertical axis get pushed to the end. What's important here and why I mention this, because we'll be having a look at these in all types of justification and aligns, is because if I change the flex direction to column instead of simply row, what you notice is that it changed to a column. Nothing too crazy, but the justify content and the align items are actually switched. So remember when the justify content centered it on the horizontal axis? Now if I say center, it will center it on the vertical axis, because in reality, the main axis got vertical and the justify content always stands for the main axis. In the meanwhile, the cross axis got horizontal, so if I say start, then it will get pushed to the left side. I hope that's clear, because this is really important to understand this. If it's not, comment down below, but we'll be having a look at a few examples going forward, so you don't have to worry about it. Just remember that justify content is the main axis. The main axis is by default a row, but if you set it to a column, it will turn a 90 degrees angle. So it will be vertical. Just take that away and you'll be fine using Flexbox. So the next task is to showcase your justify skills. And we have all these set. All 6 child elements are tagged so that we can work in all 6, because there are 6 justification settings that you can set. So starting with the default, it's basically just start. Justify content start will do nothing. It will make the elements as they are right now, because that's the default. There is justify content center, which you've already seen. It will push the element to the center on the main axis, and remember it's horizontal right now. And as for the third one, there is justify content end and flex end, and start and flex start are the same, but I prefer to use end. So it basically just pushed on the main axis to the end side. And there are 3 more special justifications that you can use. One of them is space evenly. It's the simplest of them all. It just spaces them out evenly. Takes the space that's available and takes them so that they take up equal space from the sides and from each other. Quite simple. Coming to the next one. Justify content space between. What space between will say is listen up pretty rectangles, take up all the space that you have between each of you and push each other to the sides. So don't take up space from the side, that's only the margin that's applied here, but they will use every space given to push each other away. And this is usually what we use when we design navbars, because on the left side there is usually a logo and on the right side there are usually the links, or vice versa, but it's the justify content space between that's usually applied there. And then the last one is justify content space around. Now what space around will do, as you can see, it's similar to the space evenly and the space between, but not quite right, because it takes the space and puts it around the boxes. There is space that's put around the right side of the two, the little red and the yellow box. There is space that's put between them, and you can see that the spacing is twice as much as on the left side and the right side. That's because there is space put around the middle object as well. And these are the justification settings. So start, center, and evenly, space between, and space around. Most of the times you'll be just using the center, but it's important to know that there are the other settings as well. Now we're moving on to showcasing our alignment skills. This will be, because it's a row on the vertical axis, So align items is what we are going to be using. And there is this star. Quite simple. It won't do anything. On the other hand, there is align items center, which will center the element. So it pushed more to the center, and I will show you this in a minute at the developer tools. But the last one is align items end. You've also seen it in the second task. It just pushes it to the end. And while it may not be visually the best, if you come to the developer tools, you can see that this second div container that we're styling is actually 300 pixels. There's 300 pixels height given. And you can see that when we gave the start, it's actually in the start of the 300 pixels. On the center, it's in the center. And on the end, it's at the end. It's not visually the best to show this, but the developer tools help us make it easy. Now coming to the centering my text, there are flex containers and flex items. As of now, we've only used flex containers, and the flex container is anything that you put display flex on. And the children of a flex container are usually flex items. However, flex container, a flex item can also be flex container. So the way this is going to be working is the center my text will say display flex. So we enable flex properties on the box itself, and then so to center them, I center them on the horizontal axis, on the main axis, and I center them with align items on the vertical axis as well. And there you can see the texts are now centered. From now on, you'll be seeing this text centering all across the screen, because from now on there are texts inside the boxes. And the seventh task will be aligning the items diagonally. To align them like that, we have to work in 3 boxes, and there is something called align self. Align self will work on flex items, and you can set the base values as you did before. So there is flex start here, there is no simple start, there is flex start. Then we can align one of them to the center, which won't change its position basically. And there is the align self end. And if I save now, live server will refresh it for me, and you can see they are set in a diagonal order. But what if here is there the task 7 flex container? What if I change it to be flex direction column? Well, then you can see, since they are columns, they got a little bit wider, because now the axis is changed, and now the align items are aligning on the horizontal axis, so the align self. But I'll just comment this out, and now you can see it's back to the normal diagonal. As for task 8, it says make the elements wrap to the next row. Now, what does this mean? There is a property called flex wrap, and here you can say no wrap, wrap, or wrap reverse. We'll have a look at wrap first. So flex wrap will make it responsive. So before I applied it, you would just squeeze the elements and they would flow out of the screen. But now, if I open the developer tools and pay close attention to the elements there, if I start squeezing, if there is no longer 100 pixels width available for the rectangle to be placed there, then it jumps to the next row. As I come, it will always jump to the next row. And the usage of this is usually when you need some responsivity for some cards, and you want them to be effortlessly responsive on a mobile as well, or any device. Then you just basically say flex wrap, and as the screen squeezes together, it will get properly aligned. Now coming to task 9, make the space between all elements 30 pixels evenly. Now, as you can see, there are margin settings all over the elements. Before, they all had margins, and after this, they all have margins. But this is a property that I wanted to show you, because we could also say margin, but in Flexbox, we also have something called gap. So I could simply say, this is for the flex container to gap, and it's the task was 30 pixels. So if I come down now, you can see it's not like a margin, it only puts spacing between the elements, even though the margin puts at the bottom, top, and on the left sides as well. Gap will only put between the elements so that Flexbox know how to lay these out. The 10th task is going to be make the order of the squares reversed. To make them reversed, there is something called order. It's that simple. It's the flex property called order. And then this has to be applied to flex items, so the children, the boxes, right here at all three places. And I can say for the first element to be order 3, the second element should be at the second place, and then the third element should be at the first place. If I save, live server will drop me back to the top. But if we come back, you can now see that item 1 is actually at the third place, as we said it should be. Item 2 is in the middle, nothing changed because we set 2 for it. And then item 3 is basically at the first place because we said order 1 right here. Now there are 2 more tasks left for us. One of them is going to be the shrinking property and the other is the growing property. First off, we have to apply something called a flex basis to all the box elements. So actually not here, but to all the box elements, because that would be the second child. And this flex basis, what is going to say is what's the limit for minimizing the rectangle. So it would replace the width of the rectangle. So let me say, I don't know, 200 pixels for the flex basis. Then it would be 200 pixels big or wide. And then there's a property called flex grow. And flex grow is you can give 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are 100% values. So the flex grow 1 will grow by 100% in a ratio compared to the other elements, because if the second element receives flex grow 2, then it will grow twice as much as the first element. But here in the task it said that 2, 3 and 5 ratio should be the growing rates. So if I refresh, you can see how despite having a 200 pixel flex basis, now they've grown. This one grown by 2 ratio. The item 2 grew by 3 ratio and the item 3 grew by 5 ratio. If I just, let's say the flex basis is going to be 50 pixels, then it's even more visible, because then the item grew to be 200 pixel wide, I believe. But we'll have a look in the developer tools. Well, not exactly 200, because if I squeeze the developer tools, you can see how they shrink and how they grow. And the last one, the shrinking task, is going to be almost identical to this. You need a flex basis. The task says that let them shrink in a 3:1 ratio. Quite simple. We need the flex basis, which will be, well, this needs to be bigger first, so let's say 300 pixels. And there is something called flex shrink, and this is the same ratio value that you could give to flex grow. So it would be 3 this time. The second child will shrink 2 times, and there will be a 1 given to the last child. Third child shrinks by only 100%. The second child will shrink by 200%, and the third child will shrink by 300%. So if I open the developer tools, you can already see when it opened that the shrinking changed, and I can just squeeze them together unless FlexWrap messes up the alignment. And you can see how the shrinking is literally the third item won't even shrink properly, because there is only a flex shrink 1 given, in contrary to the item 1, which has a flex shrink 3 given. So with that, this playground is basically done. We've completed all the tasks. You will be able to get this for yourself and practice a little bit with it. But before we finish, there's something I'd like to show you. There is a game called Flexbox Froggy. This Flexbox Froggy game is basically just teaches you how to use Flexbox through its own game. You have to make the frog go to the little leaf right there, and the solution here would be saying justify content and, for example. Oh, and doesn't actually work. It needs to be flex and now you can continue on to the next level. So this little Flexbox Froggy helped me a lot while I was learning Flexbox, and I encourage you to also try out this type of game because our video was inspired by something like this. So with that, the video is over. I hope you enjoyed it. If you found value in it, please consider giving us a like, maybe even subscribe. But other than that, I just hope to see you in the next one.